anybody to help best practices. My name's Poppy, or tea counsellor. I recognise a few faces in the room, but a quick show of hands. How many people is this their first event or first help and best practices workshop? So about half and half. You're a liar, by the way. So lovely to meet you all. So if people aren't aware, these workshops have been running for about 7 years now. Started by a very good friend and colleague of mine called Kingswick, which is
some
helping
workshop in the way.
in London at the LAM events. They started off as a kind of a run of a couple of workshops, and they're still going 7 years later. So when LAMchester started, obviously in the northwest, it was something that we brought up and we've been running them regularly. They started running them when they went to school there. So for people who haven't met, it's lovely to meet you all. I hope you're enjoying your first event and welcome. A few little housekeeping sort of messages. Anybody who comes here is obviously going to be on camera. We are streaming live at the moment, so if people don't want to be recorded, please be mindful of that. I believe the people sitting in this group are absolutely fine if you do to go out, just be aware. If anybody would like to ask a question or participate in the workshop in any way, and they would rather that their voice wasn't recorded or picked up and they'd like to contribute, if you please put your hand up and kind of make some sort of signal or gesture that we know you'd like to contribute and like to ask a question. My beautiful assistant, Joey over here, will come and make sure that your voice can be heard in a way that your voice is not recorded. So if anybody would like to do that, please do so. Otherwise, the floor is pretty open. These workshops are aimed at discussion about anything in relation to kink or even non-kink in terms of mental health, well-being, communication, general psychology, anything of that nature that people want to ask questions about. I welcome kind of collaboration from other people in the room. Quite often there's people here who have as much knowledge, if not more knowledge on a certain topic or subject than I do. And we share ideas. I think one of the things that's really obvious is that it's great to share skills in terms of how to do something, be it caning, be it plugging, be it wax play, be it medical play, but ultimately it all boils down to quite often what's going on here and some of the core fundamental things about how we find partners, how we communicate, how we maintain relationships. Lots of those themes are explored in this room. Quite often some of the themes and questions that we get are things that we've been asked before, and sometimes we get brand new questions and contributions. So with that, I'd like to throw it open to any questions anybody might have. Anybody at all? If nobody asks a question, one of these two is asking a question, and then that's goddamn awful. So if anybody's got anything they'd like to ask or anything they'd like to share, that would be great. Okay, then I've got a question. If no one's got a question, what brought you to space? You said about half of the room have said it's their first event or first HMP workshop that you've attended. So I guess my question to you guys is, what made you give up an hour of your precious free time on Sunday afternoon at an event such as this to join me here today? What are you hoping to get from this workshop?
So I'm trained to be a therapist, and really want to support people who are in like intimate relationship styles.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where my interest lies, and I was just like, yeah, I'm really happy that this was on stage. It's perfect. So I guess I'm interested in like how you can support, how you can bring things like that, like how to make sure that someone feels safe.
Yeah. And I think that's a really interesting question. And I get approached from people all the time, sort of more regularly, who are perhaps studying or they're training or they want to do a piece of research, quite often that we get, and they're wanting to be a voice of our community as part of that. And what I always say when I say to people who are looking to work with somebody, what I always say to people is ultimately I think you have different tiers of practitioner. In the same way that you have people who might be person-centered counsellors, you have people who perhaps are qualified clinical psychologists and everything in between. I think ultimately when it comes to the scene and the kink in the community, we have people who are kink aware and we have people who are kink active. And I think there's a real difference there. And I think a lot of people are becoming more kink aware, alternative community aware, LGBTQ plus aware, and we talk about places like kink pages, people aren't about kink pages, which is where people who perhaps are working as therapists or counsellors or however they describe themselves might sort of, register themselves. And they do a lot of good courses as well. So they do a lot of courses for people who perhaps aren't aware of what BDSM is and what kink is and what asexuality is, to try and upskill people so that majority of people can be quite open-minded when you go in there and you want to talk about things. I guess where I'm somewhat different, and I suppose people like the fusion are slightly different, is, we are kink active. So I have been in the BDSM UK community since I was 19 years old. That's a very long time because I'm a very old woman now, but I'm not going to say how many years exactly because I'm vague. However, it is old time. And ultimately, I've lived a lifestyle, I've lived various different dynamics, I've had relationships within the community, I've had children, I've had a life, a career, I've had times when I've worked for statutory organisations and 3 letters which I would do, and now I don't, and those come with their own pros and their own cons. So I guess ultimately it's about recognising the real difference. And there is some real difficulties. There's some real difficulties to being a kink active therapist and working, like you say, in some statutory organisations right now, whatever we need, local authorities, schools, healthcare. So it's about recognising where you want to fit professionally and how much of yourself you give away. So, for example, when I was in other employment, I would be a little bit alternative, a little bit quirky, I would be not quite safe to disclose that I was bisexual, but perhaps I wouldn't have taken workshops in my region. And I guess it's where you feel that you fit. But ultimately, what I will say for any therapist is about that relationship. So if you've got somebody who is coming into your space saying, do you know what, I'm kinky, I'm alternative, what they want is to be able to be heard. But the reality is, and I say this all the time, the reality is the people who come in, the people who come into my space, my professional space, and they do identify as lifestylers, or people who just like to dip their toes in now and again, most of the time what they want to talk about is not about kink. It's not about sex. It's not about, oh my god, occasionally it is, I had this scene, I want to talk about that, or in this relationship, I'd like to discuss that, and that relationship has a really, really strong dynamic. But quite often, a relationship is a relationship. The difficulty someone wants to talk about in a relationship is about communication. It's about having different life visions to their partner, regardless of whether they're kink or they're not. So that's really, really interesting. Quite often, what you're doing is quite generic work, but with people who want to feel comfortable and heard and be able to be transparent about all of who they are. And if you're playing something happen in an open space, it makes it more. So I guess that's the benefit of being able to say anything you say. Does that answer your question? I think there was another here.
I guess I've been doing because I'm a counsellor, and one of the things that I've been wondering about for a while is how you balance being open about being connected to yourself with your personal plans and taking counsel. Because I have no idea how I'm going to know exactly what I do.
Okay, so we could be doing supervision here, couldn't we? We've got counsellors in the room. So ultimately, people do want personal professional development certificates, see me at the end. I mean, I don't normally do those, but I know kinky do, but maybe I'll start, who knows. But this is nice, this feels like supervision. And I got most of your question, but there is a really bad air conditioning here, and I'm struggling to the region. But you were saying that obviously you are a professional as well, and you were wondering about how much you were going to share. And what I didn't get was, did you mean within the therapeutic space with the client or in general?
In general, I imagine that in some cases it might make it difficult to get work and things like that because someone would replicate work and make it something.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And all I can say is that I can't speak for all people all the time. I can't speak for all employees, and I can't speak for all statutory organisations. But what I can say is that the majority of my career, I ultimately was quite guarded, and I was quite guarded in terms of it was obvious that I was a little bit alternative, and I was really, really careful about what I actually share. And I think not only has the organisations that I've worked for changed in the time that I've been doing this, should I say, I think society's changed as well. The introduction of 50 Shades of Grey, for example, the ability to be able to say, oh yeah, my ideal man is Mr. Grey. My ideal man's not Mr. Grey, that's ridiculous. But if I'm to say that in in a professional environment, people would know what I mean. And I might be raised eyebrows, but I'm very like unlikely to be pulled in front of a a panel just because I said I fancy Mr. Gray. So I think the world's changed a little bit as well. But it's about what feels safe, what exposures feel safe and what don't. I've always been quite open that I enjoy burlesque, for example. I think I don't know if anyone's seen Yvonne Teaser's book. She's got a really, really famous book. And if anyone's seen it, so one cover of it is all burlesque, which is dressed in a beautiful burlesque outfit, and it's you can have it on your coffee table, and it's quite socially acceptable. And you flip it over, and it's a fetish cover. I don't know if you've seen it. She's wearing it, and you all know what we're talking about, yeah. And I feel like my life's been represented a little bit by that book in some ways. So that the side that I've always been the book, I'm not changed. This is me. This is who I am. But the side that I have on show has always been, well, it's this side of it. It's the burlesque side of it. And I've been quite open and honest that, I'm alternative, I'm quirky, I'm liberal, I like regular choice shoes, and I dye my hair when I've been in an employment that will allow it. However, the other side of it, do I say, I like SM, that I might engage in SM activities, when it's appropriate for me to do so, and even then, what the hell is appropriate? And that, we could talk for an hour about what's appropriate. No, I probably haven't. And I think that's just something that comes. And that's changed. How open I have been has ultimately changed with how much freedom I've got. So now I have my own clinical practice that I work on, and I've left a statutory organisation, and I work for a different organisation that has, two people at the helm who both know who I am and are quite fabulous little people. My own professional has changed. And that ultimately is a very personal journey, you will go on that. And lots of things will impact that, whether you're in children or you're in schools, that you need to negotiate how the world is changing, how the world is turning. And ultimately what things are safe to disclose. So for me, quite often I will talk about having a female partner and a male partner simultaneously, rather than saying I'm off to a fetish sex, because that feels safer. And I think that's what we have to remember. We have to be mindful of it. Now, in terms of professional practice, quite often people are finding me as a sleep counsellor, so more and more of my own lived experience might come up in the work that I'm doing. Quite often it doesn't, sometimes it will, and that's okay. Do I bring my alternative sexuality into my absolutely vanilla work? You know what, sometimes I do, if I'm very honest, because it's who I am, and I bring me into my therapeutic space. Does that person necessarily know what that is? No, of course I don't. I'll be talking about, how we manage relationships, and a lot of what I was saying as well, who sets the expectations and who follows it, and some of the work that I will do with couples will be very much guided by my experience, my lived experiences in a relationship with dynamics. I always joke, I do a life vision piece of work with couples that I work with, and I've actually bastardized one, and I'm absolutely paranoid. I'm so paranoid that I have to have two computers that I work on, because I have one life vision worksheet, which is a DBT schools skill worksheet that I use, that's taken out of Marshall and Holmes' textbook, and it is as you would expect. And then I have one that I've adapted, and it's got a section on, in terms of life vision, where does kink and sexuality and dynamics, and where does that fall? Because for some of us, it's a huge big part of our life. And I've added that section in. And I'm like, my God, never these twins should meet. They have to be kept so separate. So when we talk about the realities of kind of working as a therapist in, I don't know, the other world and in our world, the reality for me is just, lots of computers, lots of compartmentalization, lots of profiles, lots of passwords, lots of anxiety about, God, I sent the right one there, didn't I? Let me just double check and make sure I've sent that right one. And you know what? I've never to this stage slipped up. I've said it now, it's going to happen again. But I've never slipped up. That's going to be next week. I've never slipped up catastrophically in a way that would be problematic. However, that's kind of the undercurrent of have I set the right things in the right place. But it's definitely possible to balance both things in the same way that it's possible to balance, being in a DDLG relationship and being a really, really adequate parent. We've just got to have a good idea of transactional analysis and where we are at any one time, yeah? So I hope that answers that question a little bit. But yeah, you do have to tread carefully, and hopefully, as time moves on, how carefully you have to tread will lessen a lot of it. When I started practicing, I couldn't even have pink hair. Oh my God, you must have a natural coloured hair to be able to talk to somebody about their problems. Otherwise, how are you going to have a conversation with them if hair's not long. And I think we're moving on from that. So, has anybody else got a question? Anybody in the room not interested in having a stealing my job? Or in having a career in this kind of line of work? Anyone?
This is not necessarily as relevant to that, but it's like a question I guess I'm also supposed to it's like, which is the funny, I had like COVID a month ago.
Yeah.
And like long COVID is very real, the fatigue is getting like rough.
Yeah.
I find it really hard to dog right now because like I just am so tired all the time.
Yeah.
It's like, what is your advice for that? Like for me, low energy, you still want to like do stuff, but it's like I'm so tired.
Well, that's a really interesting question, and thank you. I think a lot of people are struggling with long COVID. I think long COVID, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg in terms of how that will impact our community, be it the community, but also society at large. And there's lots of research going into that, and there's lots of people who refer to support for long COVID. But I think prior to that as well, that ultimately anybody who suffers from a long-term chronic illness, things like ME and MS and chronic fatigue in general, anybody who has those difficulties and is involved in the lifestyle has been, having these challenges for a long time. So in some ways, they're new to the masses, but I don't think they're new to our lifestyle, new to people who are affected. So that's what I will say. And I think ultimately when you're saying, I'm really finding it difficult to do the stuff that I want to do, if you were coming to me and we were having a conversation about that, my first question would be, okay, what stuff? So ultimately, what is the stuff that you're burning to do and you're struggling to do? And then how the hell do we adapt to that? How do you look at how you pace yourself? How do you look at things like, do people know what I mean if I say like sort of spooning, how many spoons we've got in that sort of theory? How do we incorporate that way of thinking? We do that every day, or some people have to do that every day in terms of getting dressed, going to work, raising their children, brushing their teeth, getting their shopping in. How do we then apply that to kink and sex and sexuality, and what does that look like? And if there's a dynamic in one way, how does that incorporate? How does that feature? How can we? I, for example, I cannot tie rope, not a rigger at all. And I've done scenes as a top, and I've said to somebody, not because I'm deficient in spoons, but I've said, what? When you do your figure, will you tie this? And then can I take over and torment somebody? That would be lovely. I'd love it if you could do that. Would you mind doing that? And they said, yeah, do you know what? I'll do that. Now, if I was somebody who was really, really struggling with spoons, I can imagine that might be something that I do for a different reason. The same impact and effect, but for a different reason. So how do we use the resources that we have? Our internal resources, our external resources in terms of the person you're playing with, and then the wide resources, the people that we know, the people that we spend time with. How do we all come together to make what it is that you want to do possible? Because the reality is it all starts here. Sex is fundamentally in our brain. It's what we, and what is that's not really going to be. You might not be able to do something that is, a scene, a full-on, impactful scene, but you might be able to say to someone, do you know what? I'm really struggling with effects on code this week. I want you to do the journal for me. Or I want you to do this for me. You're putting the work and the onus on the other person, but you're still getting the control, you're still getting the power dynamic, you're still getting obedience, you're still getting, but I have to know what it is that you want to get. It might be the other way, it might be the other side of the switch, slash something. You might be a submissive person who's really struggling to serve because of the symptoms of long COVID. What can you do? I guarantee there will be something that you can do for a person you're in a relationship with that they will consider useful. You can do that from bed. You can send an email on your phone. You can, what can you do? I would appreciate anybody who could do some admin tasks for me, and they literally could do that from bed, curled up in a duvet with daytime telly on, and they'd still be able to do something that would be a benefit to me. So I guess it's about having a really honest conversation about what is it that you wish you could do and how do you replicate that. Because what you want to do is a really, 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 really kinky sexy scene probably involving genitals. But ultimately, it will boil down to I want to be useful, I want to be, I want to be of service to somebody, or I want to hurt someone, I want to flip something on someone, I want to have control, I want to have what underpins the BDSM, and how do we make the most of that until we can get back to, do you know what, I've got the energy to do this. And how do you communicate? How do you negotiate and do a scene and you say, do you know what, I really want to play with you, we're going to fucking play, we're going to have a scene, however, we're going to have to adapt it. We might have to stop. I might have to stop earlier than I would. I might do something different than I already would. And that all comes back to the basic underpinning of communication. how do we communicate exactly where we are, what we want, and what we're realistically capable of. And what I will say as well as the last thing, for anybody who's struggling with, be it long COVID, be it chronic fatigue, be it depression, be it anything that's preventing them from being where they want to be versus where they currently are, is this concept of radical acceptance. If anybody doesn't know what radical acceptance is, there's a really amazing weblog, I'm showing my age there. There's a really, really wonderful piece of writing on FetLife, written by the picture. Only very recently it's come back up. It's an old writing, but it's been reactivated. And it talks about Marshall Linehan's concept of radical acceptance. And basically what it says, if we are resisting, if we are living in a place of, I want to change, I can't accept where I am, I can't accept that. A few months ago I was able to do this and now I'm unable to do this. So that's where true suffering is. And to be able to, not necessarily happy about it, we don't have to condone it, we don't have to be okay, but we can accept this is where we are right now, it will make the process a lot easier. And I think that's true of anybody who has limitations. Hopefully that's temporary, perhaps at a long term, that are impacting on something really fundamental to them, like sex, kink, relationships, that kind of thing. What are you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say one piece of advice, and I'm going to share on this one because 98, I was in a car crash that changed my life. And in 2006, I fell 30 foot that did another set of damage on top of. And the car crash was one state of mental being where I was very, very frustrated by not being able to do the things that I wanted to do. And it took me a long time to come to terms with that. The second accident, I was a lot better with myself and I didn't beat myself up about the things that I couldn't do. And thankfully, the people around me at the time became more supportive and said, hey, you can't do this today, but you know that you might be able to in a year or two's time. And some of it took 5 or 6 years for me to get back to the stage where things that I did easily before, I then had to kind of plan for and say, okay, if I have a quiet week, then I can have a really intense weekend, but I've got to build up that reserve of energy because there is only a finite amount of it. So please spend the time and be good to yourself in this one, because a lot of the people I know that are having fatigue and long COVID, the frustration of not being able to be who they were before is the kind of the trap. And if you fall into it, it's very, very difficult to pull yourself out. So if you're mindful of that and avoid it in the first place, and your partner also needs to be as supportive as possible because you're both going through that change. You're at the sharp end of it, but the back end of it is, hey, I used to enjoy this on a regular basis. We can't do it, but you'll find new things to do to adapt that will fill in as you work back towards where you were.
And I think the key word in all of that is compassion ultimately. And I get into these conversations all the time. So my bag would be like, what I absolutely love is DBT. So for people who aren't aware of that style of cognitive therapy, I can see Marshall it's like, the guru. However, I'm also realistic enough to know that you take a bit of all components, mix it all up in a bag, and it's all about the relationship you have with human beings. And that's ultimately what my work is about, my activity is about. But I do get into conversations with people quite often, and they'll say, oh, DBT is not very compassionate, it's really challenging, it's very direct, it's quite assertive, it's a bit, I'm much more of a compassionate kind of, therapist. And I think ultimately what I come back with every single time is to teach the concept of radical acceptance is one of the most compassionate things you can do. And it is about that concept of self-compassion and compassion for others. And if you can take a huge big dose of that into a relationship when times are difficult, when you've fallen, however many people fallen, you've been in a car accident, you've got long COVID, that is how we will sustain ourselves and how we will sustain the people that we love. So it is about really, really being compassionate with yourself and looking at what you can do versus all that regret and turmoil about what you now can't do. We can all still do something, and I know that's easier said than done, but we can all do something, and we all have to recognise the worth of what we do. And that's where a really good partner, dominant, top, daddy, whatever, submissive comes in, allowing us to recognise the worth and what we can still do. Does that make sense? Does that answer that question? Yeah. Has anybody else got? Oh yeah.
It's not a question, it's just something following on from, from that. So I was in the practice, so I've got that was on my left side, so I feel early onset osteoarthritis. So for me, in terms of like a big scene, planning is, if you've been into a close scene, planning is key. So to me, it's making sure I'm topped up on painkillers and I've not done anything so stressful in the day that it's going to really hurt me. But yeah, planning is a really big benefit, I would say. I know we all love the spontaneity, but sometimes that's just not possible. Sometimes the planning can have anticipation and all that sort of stuff as well. So yeah, planning.
Thanks, sorry. You're right. We talk about pre-mortem things all the time, and sometimes we all have different things that we have to plan for. My responsibility is very different. I have to plan for when I've got the time. I've got responsibility because I've got an empty house. And when if I'm going to do a really heavy scene, am I going to be responsibility free for an actual fact as long as I'm going to need? Because that real shift in headspace can be really difficult. It can cause a big drop. If you're suffering from some physical difficulties because of accident or injury or a medical condition, those considerations are different, but it's still about how do we pre-mortem, how do we know what we're going to need, and make sure that we've got a time and space for that. And certain things we'll need more of afterwards, and certain things we'll need less of. And that comes with knowing ourselves, knowing our kinks, knowing what we need in any given time, and that really changes. If there's something that we do that we think, this scene is going to probably take a day or two to get over, and physically I'll be fine, be it from a physical perspective or from a psychological drop perspective, and some things might last a little bit longer and take a little bit longer. And it's only experience and planning, like you say, that accounts for that. And the contingency as well. What happens if we get it wrong? Because that's the reality of life. Sometimes we will have drop for longer than we think we will. Sometimes, it takes us longer to get over the seed, or we spend more than we were planning to in terms of spoons. I'm really out of spoons. So what does that safety blanket and our contingency look like for us? And that's where our community comes in. I've been around for a long time, and I have 10 people who my nearest and dearest, really, really close friends. So some of them are great with my kids, some of them are great with my dog, some of them are great just, to call on in the middle of the night, some of them are for great advice. Who are these people that I will call on when I need them, and do I have those people, available to me? So all of those things are considerations, I guess, when we're talking about subjects like this, and we're talking about planning scenes. Has anybody else got anything to share about that, or a question?
I have a meeting.
Oh,
Yeah, I think planning is definitely a big thing. Thinking the things that matter the most to you and dropping everything else. Not from a big perspective, but like vacuuming is exhausting.
Yeah.
Ditch it. Maybe someone else do it. Like drop it.
Yeah.
Focus on, for me, it's like sewing. Sewing is the thing that brings me joy. So I do it in bed. So I can't do it. There's ways to mitigate it and change it. But if it's really important to you, make sure that you are putting in time to do it. Because otherwise you'll just haven't done things that make you happy and you're sad. So it's important to make time and
yeah, and I would really empathise that. And in general life as well, I haven't ironed for, oh my God, about 7 years. If I have my way, I will never, ever, ever iron again. And there's ways that I've got around that. I've got shirts that I don't have to iron. If I do get a tiny iron pile, thank you, someone will do that for me. And it's like, I'm not tying my leg down, I'm not going to iron. I'm abundantly, unashamedly going to admit to you, never fucking ironing again, right? And I don't care. And I think that ultimately we have to make those decisions, and we can't do everything, we can't be everything to everyone. And we have to know what our priorities are. I think that's key. So you come to me and you said, do you know what, I'm never moving on, certainly not moving at the moment, but I love to sew. How many people I see and I talk to and I say, what are your priorities? Being in kink, in a relationship, in sex, what are your priorities and what are your absolutes and what are your nice to have and what are your absolutely not? Well, maybe someone I'm in a relationship and care about what. And that people that I talk to, they don't know. They don't know they love to sew. They don't know what it is that they want. They're a little bit lost, they're a little bit, and that I think is where talking to somebody can really help. And I would say that, wouldn't I? Of course, that's what I do. But talking to somebody, anybody, close friends, confidants, it doesn't have to be a qualified therapist. You don't know, you're sitting, you're feeling a little bit lost. which I think a lot of us are post-pandemic. If I'm very honest, we're all coming out thinking, my God, that was 2 years of my life that I'm never getting back. It doesn't feel right. What's next? Where am I going to work from home? Am I going to work from the office? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? We're all questioning a little bit what the next steps look like. And I think it's really important to have an idea of that. And if we don't know that we love to sew, we need to think about what we love. What do we love? What are our passions? What are I know? Call it life vision, call it whatever, every different demographic of therapy will call it something different. But who are we? What do we want for life? And what does a life worth living for us look like? What does a kink life worth living for us look like? What it is that we're really, really looking for. So thank you. I think it's a really good. Anybody else got anything they want to ask or say?
I was thinking about people change anyway.
Yes.
Not necessarily as a result of long COVID or car accident.
Yeah.
People change. People change particularly when you're new to sing, when you're new to the sing. For newbies, quite often you come into the sing, right, I'm a dog, I'm a little, I'm a this, I'm a that,
Yeah.
this is how I present myself. And over time, as you familiarise yourself with other things, think, well, maybe I've written that as well, maybe I'm not. How do I deal with that change in myself? And how do I deal with the change with my partner, for whom I've been this massive dog for the last year, and suddenly I want them to talk, hey.
Really interesting, isn't it? I think that's a really interesting point, because what we say in relationships is really important is consistency. Oh my goodness, consistency is key. How often do we hear that? But ultimately, you're right, human beings do change, and it's how do we grow together. And I think what happens in relationships quite often is someone will present themselves as something, and I think we have this is something that's known within our community is a little bit of an issue. Someone will present themselves as something, be it tall or little, or because it attracts a higher premium, it's harder to come by, or it's seen to be more attractive or more popular. And they will present as that, and then quite soon afterwards do you know what, now I'm presenting as that. And that's very different to somebody who's here. Do you know what, with the context of time and experience and growth and living a life, I am changing. And I've changed from when I came into this community at 19 to where I am now. Of course I have. The relationship dynamic that I'm in has changed. I switched now, I used to do that a decade ago. So much about me has changed. But if you were to talk to people who know me and you would ask my opinion of myself, I would say that I'm a very consistent kind of human being. I am. However, clearly, if you were to talk to somebody about what I look like then and what I look like now, they would say they're not the same human being. So how is that possible? And I think it's motivation. What drives us? What's behind our change and our growth? If we're changing because ultimately this is about us, this is what we want, this is what we need, and we're communicating that in a very authentic, transparent, honest way, brilliant. If what we're doing is presenting ourselves as one thing, when really we know or we've got a good idea, we're another thing, that's where I have real impact. And it's how do we know the difference? How do we know the difference in ourselves as well?
I think it's also when you are new, you have a very strong idea of what you want, but you haven't yet learned that it's actually the interaction with you and others. So you can have a really strong, determined view of yourself, but it's only when you actually come out and start interacting with other people do you realize, well, I might feel incredibly dominant, but that Jerry, well, makes me want to sub to him all the time. And
I've got that on tape. Looking into that.
It's on the live stream. I did think about it.
I'm going to agree with you to a point, and I'm going to disagree with you to a point, because I love to do that with you go back. And I think ultimately you're right there in what you're saying. So we quite often are involved in an interpersonal relationship, and that interpersonal relationship involves another. Sometimes it's one other, sometimes it's many others, yeah? And we are different in each of those relationships. Somebody will bring out different parts of our personality, different parts of our character. We're talking about TA. People don't know what I mean by TA, transactional analysis. And then a very, very, very whistle-stop tour of it. We're talking about our inner adults, our inner parent, and our inner child. And we could have to do an hour workshop on what that means, and all that sort of stuff. But ultimately, how we are with another human being will depend on how that human being is with us in a very nutshell. And I think that's part of what you're saying, and that's very true. But what I will disagree with there is that we all have a very strong sense of identity. Some people in our community have a very, very strong sense of identity. Some people, I would say a high proportion of people would be we don't. We have real difficulties with identity for many, many different reasons. A lot of it can be related to trauma. A lot of it can be related to, do you know what, I've spent my whole life thinking there's something wrong with me, and I've just found the BDSM community, and okay, there's nothing wrong with me, this is okay, and this is who I am. But shit, this is who I am? Who am I? Who am I really? What do I want? There's all these options. And we are a little bit obsessed with labels. You've got to come in, you've got to decide, sit down, decide who you are you this, are you that, are you the other, who are you, tell me who you are. And we're not great when people say, I don't know. I don't know who I am, I'm still deciding. Do you know what, I absolutely loved when FetLife came up with exploring, or I'm not sure, or I'm, because that's a relatively new option in terms of people coming into the scene and deciding who they are and what they are, and I love that. I think anybody, I'm all about controversial opinions, but I'm going to own it. I think anybody who comes into FetLife and starts a profile for the first 12 months should put, I'm deciding, I'm exploring, I don't know. I think that's a really wise thing to do because we don't know. We don't know what it is that we like and what we don't like. We will change. We will change in the context of every relationship and every person that we meet, and we will change anyway because we're human beings. But I think the other side of that, the people who've been around for a long time, let people be uncertain. Let people be unsure about who they are, what it is that they want. Be honest, be transparent about that. It needs to be okay to say, I don't know. And we live in a society where quite often it's not okay to say, well, I'm not sure, or I don't know, or can you get back to me on that? If somebody asks me a question, I make a habit of saying, let me sleep on that, I'm going to think about it. I never commit to anything instantaneously. And I think that's a really good habit to get into. And I think it's okay to say, actually, I'm not sure. Do I want to stick that giant book up my hands? Well, I do at the moment because at the minute I want to do anything else I can do because I want to make a really good impression. I want you to like me, I want you to play with me again. But it's a really fucking pickup book. I'm going to think about that. Can I get back to you? I'm going to do my research. And I'm going to interview on it. But ultimately, that's what I say. It's okay to say, I haven't decided.
It's quite it can be quite a mindfuck when things become real.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of joined the scene less than 10 years ago. I became active after a 30-40-year relationship with people born.
Yeah.
All in my head, all masturbatory fantasy. And then suddenly I come face to face with people, women who actually like being tied up and hit.
Yeah.
This is real.
Yeah.
Fuck, what do I do with that?
And it's really different, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really different. We think we want something, and that's the danger, isn't it? We fantasize about it. It's the difference between, a thought crime and
Suddenly that picture has a personality.
Yeah.
And it's related to me. We're talking about the football.
And there's responsibility attached to that personality, and there's, medical conditions like me, and there's responsibilities, and there's ethics, and there's, I always say, pornography is devoid of ethics to some degree, with people who, disagree in the room, and I think, some pornography is more ethical than others. But it's depersonalized in the extreme. And we think we want X, and we're confronted with X, and we don't. And that's okay too. It's all right to like the fantasy of. It's all right to, how many times I'll be in the bed with somebody, in the bedroom, and seeing somebody, and I will bring the fantasy of X into that space, and we both know, but we probably don't want the reality of it to be there. And it's about how do we identify the difference in ourselves. This is what I'm going to fantasize about. This is ultimately what I want to do. This is what I want to do every week because it's a huge big kink of mine. This is something I want to try to go out and take on with it. Now, how do we learn those differences? And you're right, we only learn them by doing them. But sometimes we learn them by saying, I fantasized about doing this for a very, very long time, and now I'm confronted with the reality of it. Maybe not. And it's all right to always say, I've changed my mind, I don't want to do that. That book club's a bit too big. I know I was fantasized about rosebuds and saw on the internet, but now, do you know what? I think we're going to stop at 4 fingers. Like, we can do that. It's all right to do all of those things. But it's about making sure that you have the skills to be able to do those things. And that's why we're here. Because actual fact.
And the confidence to be able to say, no, actually, that's enough.
No. And we talk about this all the time, and this comes up in workshops regularly. How many times do we say no in our lives? I've got a big poster in my house, no, with a full stop and a capital at the front of it is a complete full sentence. It really, really is. And if you aren't comfortable and confident at saying no, all right, we'll probably say no, thank you. A lot of us say no, I can't because, which Judy's about, we should all be able to just say no. And if that's something that you have difficulties doing, you can practice it. Set yourself a challenge. I'm going to say no 3 times this week. Probably say no, thank you, but I'm going to say no. I'm going to say, I'm not going to do that. It's a really, really, really important skill to have. And if you can't say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not taking that Amazon parcel then because I don't fucking want to, there's no way you're going to be able to say no to somebody that you're trying to build a dynamic with, you know, that ultimately there's a power imbalance there. How are you going to do that? So practice in the easy spaces, practice where it feels safe, practice where it's not an effort. I take no courses for anyone, I'm terrible. Nobody wants to live next door to me. You can say something else, Joe.
No.
Has anybody got another? I think it might be the final question, I'm not sure, but has anybody got anything else to ask?
It might take a little bit
Yeah.
to be, I find that it's new, a bit shy, a bit social anxious. How do you kind of start to work through that to meet people and to kind of quiet those scary voices and actually do
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really good question, and thank you for asking that. Yeah, so the question was, if you're new, if you're quite new to Kingdom, the scene of the community, how do you dampen down that anxiety and start meeting people in the real world, get out to things, and where do you start this? And I think the answer is, this is a really, really good place to start, you know. And what I say to anybody is about meeting people in the real world. You know, I meet a lot of people who come and see me and they've been involved in relationships or dynamics, or, you know, I had someone and they said that, you know, that they almost had their heart broken recently. And that was all through an interpersonal relationship that was built online. Now, I'm not going to sit and criticise that. I think it's absolutely possible to do, particularly when you have someone who's slightly vulnerable and who is looking for something that's quite niche. But I always say to people, get out in the real world. You know, meet people, talk to them, see the whites of their eyes, go to events, keep a really open mind. You know, there will people who will say good and bad and something in between about everybody, but we've all got interpersonal skills. We all, you know, the skills that you've got from your professional life, from relationships that you've had before, even if they're vanilla relationships, from everything that you've done from here to what's brought you here, you have a myriad of skills. Bring them into the scene. And if ultimately your amygdala starts ringing, that bit in the back of your brain is saying, I'm not happy about this doesn't feel okay, listen to it. Just because you've entered BDSM scene, don't turn it off, don't turn it down, keep it there. And make friends. You know, if you are a dominant person who wants to learn how to cane people, meet other dominant people who've been around and are really comfortable with caning people. The same as if you are submissive, if you are little, find your tribe, find your people, find friends, you know, and then ultimately that might come on to finding people to play with, to explore with, but it's not, you know, I think a lot of people see the scene as this social networking site to hook up, and, you know, we're not protecting them, it's a community. Find people who interest you, even if, you know, you're completely different sides of the stash, you'd like to go for coffee with them regardless. You know, those are the sorts of relationships to cultivate, and everything else tends to come, is always.
I can't see who asked the question, but one of the things that we say quite a lot in the newbie workshop is talk to people, talk to the crew, talk to the trainers, talk to each other. Because kinky people like we talk about being kinky. We may not be the same kink, but we like to talk about what we do.
And what I will say is as well, I know you've mentioned the time, but there's no gurus. You know, there's people who organise events, there's people who've been around for a long time, you know, they aren't necessarily the safe places to be. You know, I'm not criticising anybody, but, you know, we do this because we've got the time and inclination to do it. I do this because it helps with the business. I do this because I'm a good friend of one of the organisers. I do it because I enjoy doing it. You know, does that mean that I am the expert on anything, or that I am ultimately so trusted to go and have a scene with one-on-one, you know, in 3 hours' time because we met to do? Probably not. You know, I'm really thankful to her, but that shouldn't be the basis of what we make decisions. So, and I think lots of people fall into that trap. If someone's been around for a long time, or they're running an event, or they know everybody, then they're going to be a safe person. You know, ultimately, really do your due diligence. And I think there's a workshop later on today, at the end of today, that's on about due diligence for kinksters. So if that's something that, you know, you're interested in, I would really recommend that you go to know.
The one bit I always stress to people who are new: work at the pace that you're comfortable with, because while you've probably come across checklists and stuff like that, I guarantee you a unicorn is not going to jump out the cupboard with farting glitter around the world when you complete it all. And yet there are lots of people out there who get stuck in this frenzy of, oh my God, I haven't done all of these things yet. And then they get to the bottom of the list and there's this kind of point of disappointment of, oh, I've done it all, what's next? Well, there's plenty more to do, but you should have been better to yourself and gone, actually, if today I come out and have 3 or 4 conversations and that's as far as it goes, big tick, pat on the back, brilliant. Maybe next time you go out and say, well, actually, I want to have a conversation, but I want to steer that conversation towards the things I want to ultimately do. And then having had that conversation, the next time out, it might be, hey, I want to see your toy bag and I want to go to that stage. And then that way it kind of builds up. And to some extent, you're kind of building the excitement with it. So you're enjoying the whole journey rather than, oh my God, I've been at a kink event for an hour and I haven't had my arse back yet. And it's like, there'll be people with that attitude, we won't see them for very long because they will go at it like a bull in a china shop. They'll hit their wall, their barrier, they'll burn out and disappear. And the people who come at it a little bit more sensibly and go, wow, this is great, I'm enjoying this conversation with this person, maybe I'm going to take it a stage further, then they build much more straight, stable relationships.
It's like cooking. You can always add more salt. Once you put too much in the pot. And ultimately, we are all human first. Whether you want to go and walk the dog with somebody, or you want to go and have sex with them, you want to go and do road bondage with them, you want to go for coffee with them, you're still not sure what you want to do with them. You want to marry them and have kids and build a life with them. You want a 24/7 DS relationship. I don't care what you want to do with that person, but ultimately, they're human first. And if you don't like that human being, you don't get on. You've got completely different political views. You've got completely different life visions. You think I can guarantee if you think that in the honeymoon period, you're definitely going to think that, when they've got you tied up the rope and they're saying something controversial you don't agree with, or, them you've had kids with them and think, oh, fucking hell, what they're doing that for. So, you make those decisions early. Is this a human being I want to go for coffee with? And if the answer is, I wouldn't probably socialise with you outside of this environment, why the fuck are you socialising with it in that environment? And that's probably an unpopular opinion, but it's mine and I'm owning it and I'm having it and I'm sat on this chair. So that's that's where you start. You start with who do I have I got a connection with this human being and everything else for me. And listen to it. Thank you. I always feel so privileged when people attend I think there's another workshop now that's going to be wonderful called The Punishment with Miss Vicky Brown, and then, like I said, due diligence for deviants later on. Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.